As we hit 9 a.m. Pacific, I'm just going to show our antitrust policy notice, as usual, at the beginning of each call. We're going to kick off the call properly at 9:02 a.m. We're just giving everyone a minute to dial in.
Hello, this is Michael.
Hi, Michael. Welcome on board. We'll be starting in just a minute. We'll have a project update, and we'll have an overview of the
Hello, this is Konstantin.
Hi, Konstantin. Welcome on board. We'll be beginning the call itself in just about 1 minute. We'll just give a little bit of time for people to dial in.
Hello, this is Oliver.
Hi, Oliver.
Shane.
Yes, indeed.
I just discovered a slight mishap on my side.
Okay.
I think presentation on Uber conference doesn't work for me. Is it okay if I send you the slides?
Yes, I've got the slides from Oliver, so I can run through those for you.
I think the slides from Oliver are different than
Okay, if you just email me the slides, I'll pull them up at your point in the call.
Awesome. Will do now. Plop, plop, plop.
Okay, so we're at 9:02 a.m. Pacific. Let's begin the call itself. Our call follows the usual structure. We're going to have a roll call, we'll have a project update, and then we're going to proceed into some of the briefings lined up for this call. The first briefing will be about the Open Source License Compliance Handbook by Ghislaine and Aaron. And the second will be about Siemens and FOSSology, how tooling is working in Germany. Let's do the roll call first. So I would just ask everyone to very briefly state who they are. So this is Shane Coughlin, Linux Foundation.
Oh, it's me. Sorry.
I'll go. This is Aaron Williamson. I'm General Counsel of the FinTech Open Source Foundation, or FINOS, and I'll be delivering the briefing on the Open Source License Compliance Handbook. Thanks for having me.
Hey, this is Konstantin from Hella Glaya, and I'm supporting the open source process here in Germany, Berlin.
David Rudin, Microsoft.
Hello, this is Michael and Oliver from Siemens. I'm project leader of FOSSology at Siemens.
Hello, this is Oliver from Siemens.
And Alexius from Intel.
Hi, Alexius. Alrighty, anyone else? Oh, hello. Who's this?
Hey, it's Jelaine. I think I know a lot of you already, and I'm here to talk about the Open Source License Compliance Handbook with Aaron.
Welcome on board. Is there anyone else on the line?
Katharina, Software Compliance Academy.
Hi, Katharina. All right.
Hello, this is Mark here.
Hi, Dave.
Hey. Mark from Wind River.
Hi there, Mark. Good to have you. All right. If there's no one else on the line, then that's our roll call complete. Thank you, everyone, for a pretty full house. let's jump into the project update. So we have a few major milestones completed. The OpenChain specification 2.0 has been live for approximately 10 days. This is great thanks to Mark Giese for shepherding this to the final release. We had a lot of feedback, a lot of comments, a lot of bug fixes, and I believe that this is a great foundation for the project to go into the ISO process. Speaking of which, OpenChain is moving towards formal standardization via ISO. That process is underway. There's a couple of things happening around that. First of all, the Linux Foundation, or project related to Linux Foundation, is moving towards getting a certain type of status that allows fast-track ISO submissions. This is something that Dave Rudin is working on, along with several other great people in the Linux Foundation ecosystem. We expect OpenChain to be one of the first specifications through the gate in this fast-track submissions process. The goal is to have OpenChain as an ISO standard in Q1 2020. In the short term, the Linux Foundation's past submitter status is one of the key items, and another key item for the OpenChain project is to have OpenChain Spec 2.0 reviewed and potentially reformatted slightly, not changed in content, but reformatted slightly to fit into the ISO process. We're currently talking with some technical writers, and we're working out who will assist us in the reformatting itself. No surprises regarding what will happen as OpenChain becomes an ISO standard. Everyone will always be able to access the specification free on our website, and self-certification, as always, will be at the heart of OpenChain. We have a big revamp of the website coming in. This will align us more neatly with other Linux Foundation projects in terms of navigation structure, and it will also make the process of understanding OpenChain and self-certification, or if people optionally want it, finding assistance with certification much easier and clearer. We have a series of conformance announcements pending, just getting the final approvals and paperwork and whatnot done around PR. We expect to see the OpenChain community of conformance expand in the near term, both with people being conformant with OpenChain Spec 1.2, organizations that have been working on that for a while, and organizations conforming direct to 2.0. Some of the organizations conforming to 2.0 will be existing organizations, and some will be new parties coming on board, particularly with a couple of the adjustments in the Spec 2.0 to make it easier for a diversity of organizations across a wider set of markets to conform. I think maybe what I'd like to do here is just call Mark online. And Mark, do you have any thoughts on Spec 2.0 in terms of how long you think this spec will be in play? When would you like to begin discussions of potential edits, considerations for the future, and so on?
So I would expect, at least tentatively, we'll follow a similar program of 1 year, but that doesn't mean we have to stick to that. We could say after 1 year, you know what, it's just not enough to justify a new version. As far as when we start, I would say in about 2 weeks, we will start the process of, we have a kind of a kickoff kind of set of steps to follow that I'll go through. And I would say we'd be back in full swing come June.
Fantastic. Sounds good to me, particularly because as people begin to self-certify, we might get additional comments and suggestions. Once we're in ISO spec, it's possible people will be very happy with the current version and stick with it for a long time, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't always be working on making it better and preparing for future releases. So June sounds really good to me, Mark. Thanks always for shepherding this. It's a very valuable item.
Yeah, and one thing worth noting is to everybody, this probably new version will not fundamentally change your process or require you to change your process or enhance your process. It will probably require you to document a few more things. And I think as we move forward, we're going to be sensitive to that as well, right? And trying to upgrade to another version of it. So that's one of the things I'm going to highlight when we start the next round. I think the big thing that would probably cause any major change would be our discussions in getting to an ISO acceptance.
That's a really good point. And this is where we might see some of the formatting of the spec change quite a bit, but not the content as we move into the ISO process and the ISO technical writers have a look at it and kick the tires, so to say, on making sure it fits in the format. We'll have an exciting moment as we do some communication and liaison between technical writers and the OpenChain spec work team. And when I say exciting, I mean I think we'll potentially learn a lot about how we can look at adjusting the structure of our document in the future, and that's only going to help us a lot being a sustainable long-term standard. And Mark, great point. This isn't something that is a huge change in requirements. It's just something that refines what we've had before. So, yeah. David, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but I was wondering if there's any update or general discussion about how the ISO submission process will work to set expectations. My understanding is that Linux Foundation will get pass submitter status, so that'll give us a fast track avenue, and then OpenChain will be one of the first standards through the gate, perhaps accompanied, in relatively short order by other things like SPDX.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, happy to give a brief. Right now we are we're consulting with various experts on this to make sure we have our materials in the right order so we can land this effectively. Once we submit it. And so we're looking at different structures on how we're going to set it up. And I think right now, and if this is too many details, please stop me, but effectively I think it sounds like what we're going to be leaning towards is setting up a separate Joint Development Foundation entity to basically be the steward of all the various past submission processes that come through. And so we're in the process of documenting that, getting that set up, work with various experts, and hopefully we'll have the actual application submitted in the coming weeks. And at that point, it will go through the acceptance process, hopefully, and hopefully we'll be able to clear that pretty quickly. So we're really leveraging the pre-work, I hope, so we don't have problems in the future as we move through that process.
Oh, that's just tremendous. I mean, for those of you who don't know it, the Joint Development Foundation is designed to manage the intersection between open source and standards. And the collaboration between JDF and Linux Foundation has been underway since last year. So this sounds like a perfect fit, David. And thank you so much for shepherding this. It's tremendous to hear that the JDF letter of application to ISO will probably go in the short term. So that means, pulling back, it looks like OpenChain is probably on track for Q1 2020. Would that be correct?
I think so. The one thing I'm not sure about is how this fits into the ISO or the JTC1 meeting cadence. So I'm not sure if this is something I have to wait for the next meeting. I think they're actually meeting this week. But I'm not sure if it has to be waited for consideration until the next meeting, or if it can not be done, in that gap. So that's something I'm looking into.
And to be fair, we're building a standard for decades rather than months. So if we push back the submission, it will not be the end of the world.
Right, but we actually really do appreciate also, OpenChain willing to be the spearhead for us, because it's, it's going to be a new process for all of us.
Exciting times. All right. And I guess the next person on the spot, Alexius, it sounds like one of the cool opportunities for the next couple of months is maybe for us to keep rejigging curriculum and making sure that new people get all the reference material they want. I know you've got a tremendous amount of material in place in curriculum already. I was just wondering if there are areas where you'd like to put out a call for additional material or assistance on reviewing pre-existing stuff.
Right. It's not that we're missing anything, so it's not that we should have a call for, we're missing this part. But we have to do a review and, update of the material according to the 2.0 spec. And I was planning to start on this in the next days. As you all know, the spec 2.0 did not really change lots of stuff, but we definitely changed some of the language, and we should update the material to have this. So, again, I assume you know, the material started as a set of training slides, and this definitely have to be updated. But we have also accepted contributions from lots of people who provided more. So we should go through that and make sure that everything is now, in not in compliance, but anyway, using the same language as 2.0 and stuff like that, right? And most of the material is pure text, and we have it in different formats. So I think we should go. I think we can go through it pretty quickly. I don't expect much work to be involved in this part. The most work that I'm envisioning and I'm planning to is separate the training slides into two different versions, a short one and a longer one, because right now it's a mix, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and people, as we have seen, want to have a shorter version of the whole training slide. So yeah, we can split it into a short version and a longer version.
Excellent. So, perhaps...
Of course, anyone... Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Anyone who wants to contribute and help on that, yes, everything is welcome. Everyone is welcome. Yeah.
Yes.
It may also be worth saying that, thank you, Kat. It may also be worth saying that we've already started working on updating the template open source policy that we created for version 2. So I'm hoping that we'll have that available for review during the course of next week.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. A question on the process. Do people think it's, I don't know if anyone wants to plans to help on that, but should we start working on the GitHub environment for that? Because I can create, tickets or issues about, updating each one of them. Please review that and please review that, so that we can keep track.
I think that would be helpful, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
And the open source policy 2.0 coming out is something that's going to fit right into immediate requirements. People do like that. It's under a lot of demand here in Asia, where I get requests for that type of document from China and Japan frequently. And speaking of Japan, Alexius, we can probably expect a bunch of reference material to be landing from the Japan work team. They're translating various things right now. One thing they'll be covering is the deployment of the SPDX by Hitachi, Fujitsu, and Toshiba in more detail. There's a discussion between the Japanese companies and the general SPDX community. In a nutshell, they're defining a minimal set of SPDX that is used in deployment by the companies today, and a group of about 30 Japanese companies are gradually aligning behind that Japanese subset deployment. More news to follow. I'll be handing over to the actual Japanese work group people to discuss that on a third Monday call. Alrighty. Just moving on to the final part of Project Update, this is the time to engage. If an organization is already Spec 1.2 conformant, do have a look at Spec 2.0. The self-certification questionnaire is linked right here, and it will also be linked in the slides, which will be sent around again at the end of this call. It should be a relatively straightforward process to conform to 2.0 if you're 1.2 conformant. And if you are not conformant yet, you have the option of conforming to any version of OpenChain. If you're already doing 1.2, that is valid. That is also just fine today. But if you haven't begun conforming to 1.2, you want to go straight to 2.0, certification.openchainproject.org is where you go. It would be great if you could also let your suppliers know about this so they can continue to do their review of OpenChain, and they can use the self-certification either to get OpenChain conformance or to do internal health checks on the quality of their open source compliance program. Second, spreading the word. It's really time to tell people about OpenChain project with the new spec and the improved self-certification and the revamped website, which will be landing in the next couple of days. If you could spread the word about the project landing page and or the conformance landing page, that would be just fantastic. One of our main missions in the next couple of months is to tell people that OpenChain 2.0 is here, that self-certification or health checks are easy and free online, and there's tons of reference material to help people get themselves into a status where they've got quality open source compliance programs, or they confirm, ratify, and improve their existing quality open source compliance program. And then, without further ado, we've got two great briefings today. I'd like to hand over to Aaron and Jelaine to deliver a little bit of a briefing on their new publication, the Open Source License Compliance Handbook. So, if it's all right, I'll hand over to you right now, Aaron and Jelaine. Hi there. Are you still on the line, Aaron?
Yeah, sorry. I tried to unmute and instead disconnected my Bluetooth speaker, so I'm back.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having us, giving us the opportunity to present this work. Is it possible to turn the sharing over to me?
Absolutely. So I'm just about to cancel my sharing right now. So everyone, you'll notice that my screen sharing is down. Aaron, your screen sharing should be on the bottom right of the screen. The picture of two windows should allow you to share.
Yes, I have to use Chrome. I've been through this before, but I always forget. Jelaine, do you want to give an intro while I'm sorting myself out here? Jelaine, are you on mute?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I am here. Yeah, so I guess I'll let Aaron tell you a little bit more about his sort of perspective on the on sort of why this started. But essentially, he was looking at some of the materials out there on open source license compliance for the members of the Finos Foundation. Like I said, I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And so we got chatting about it and just sort of recognized that while there are some pretty heavy-duty license-specific materials, there isn't really one place you can look at for sort of easy-to-understand compliance info that is easy to understand to engineers and the people doing compliance. That, a little bit not the legalese part that a lot of us on this call I know are kind of used to delving into, and there's also some resources on just sort of explaining the license, but they don't necessarily go into the specifics of. It does seem like it's not. The specifics of there's resources on just explaining license, but they don't go into specifics of compliance and then tie it to the specific use case of how you're using software, which is quite critical. When you're trying to do compliance. And at the same time, my suspicion, which is going to sound a little bit like some things I said a few years ago when it comes to the curriculum training slides that we now have with OpenChain, is that probably lots of in-house counsel have developed these materials internally for their engineers, and they probably all look kind of similar with some exceptions, but they aren't out there. And then the other piece of that was just sort of recognizing in something I've long held, if anyone knows my background, I've worked before getting into this space, but I worked for a tooling company, that I think a majority of open source license compliance is kind of administrative, for lack of a better term, and doesn't really need a lawyer to be involved. And I think it's just a waste of resources to have lawyers involved in stuff that can be explained more easily in kind of like a grid-like pattern or self-serve resources, and then save that expensive lawyer time for the questions that are a little bit harder. Obviously, coming from out of the mouth of someone who's always worked in-house, who doesn't have necessarily the billable rate hours, might have a different opinion on that. But I like to say lawyers are like developers. We don't like this, answer the same question over and over. So some of that was sort of the genesis of this, and like I said, making this really easy to understand for someone who's not a lawyer and someone, or engineers in particular, or even a lawyer who's not, in this space. And also a really, really important thing that I think some people have missed when they've looked at sort of the output is making this machine readable. So many of you know my involvement with SPDX. We wanted to make sure any field names and there's consistency with SPDX. We're using SPDX identifiers, and we wanted to make sure that this was something that the various open source or other tools could consume and use. So the format, the background format, the master format is in a YAML, and then Aaron, thanks to his awesome skills, has written some scripts to convert that into more human consumable stuff. So you might just only look at the PDF if you're reading it, but the important thing to know on the back end is that it can be consumed in other ways.
Awesome, thank you, Jelaine. I am now sorted. Yeah, so, the reason that my organization decided to take this project on is that we are a membership organization of financial services firms that are looking to collaborate on open source software. The history of our founding is a little bit weird and circuitous, but basically we are a vertical industry organization for the financial services industry. An open source foundation but focused on a single industry, and there's as many of you know, as sort of veterans of this space, there's never anything particularly unique about any given industry's journey into open source, but we have found that our members do prefer sort of a sandbox to sort of learn the ropes, where they're working with those who are in their industry and understand their challenges in roughly the same way they do. So that's a little bit of background on Finos. But one thing that is somewhat unique about this industry, although every industry gets there, is that by and large, financial services firms are very early in their open source journey. They, most of them have been, of course, consuming open source for a long time, but are not contributing much to external projects, have so many internal controls, partly as a result of regulatory controls, partly as a result of their own overreaction to regulatory controls, that getting out of their own way to let a single developer contribute to a single external project requires a lot of levers to be pulled. And so we're really sort of walking with our members through the process of spinning up their open source programs and understanding the nuance of open source compliance and policy, and where we think that there is an opportunity to produce a resource that we think will have a lot of value for a lot of our members, then we've tried to put our resources behind that. So previously we produced a reference open source policy for the financial services industry, which is also available on our GitHub site and is not again not really that peculiar to the financial services industry, but is a pretty comprehensive high level thought policy, and maybe worth taking a look at if you were looking for examples of those. But in this case, we're getting a number of our members members have gotten to the phase where they've sort of released a couple of things out in the open, they've made a couple of external contributions, and now they're looking to standardize and formalize their open source compliance process. And as Jelaine said, one thing that, you know, pretty much every company doing open source at scale needs is this sort of reference on, you know, how to comply, practically speaking, with various open source licenses, so that, you know, once they've decided, okay, this software has a license that we're comfortable with and it's approved to contribute, then they need to know, you know, what do we need to do when we're putting this in a product, et cetera, to comply, practically speaking, with the terms of the license. So this handbook is not designed to provide comprehensive summaries of the terms in the licenses contained within. Rather, it's meant to summarize as clearly as possible only those terms that are practically necessary for whoever is sort of putting together the compliance package for a product. So, you know, terms that say you need to include a copy of the license and or you're required to, you know, make code available in this particular way, those go in. Terms that are disclaimers or, you know, deal with, you know, defensive suspension upon the initiation of a lawsuit, not necessarily relevant to on-the-ground compliance work, and so those are not captured in the summaries that we provide in this in the handbook. So this is the GitHub page for the project. It's on our Finos OSR GitHub organization. OSR standing for Open Source Readiness, which is the program where we do this kind of work in the foundation. And as Jelaine said, you know, one of our sort of design requirements from the beginning was that all of the content be, or at least the license compliance content, be first written in a machine-readable format, so it's something that we can easily collaborate with others on GitHub, for one thing. And then the other sort of major benefit of doing this is that the information is, you know, easily ingestible into other compliance tools. So if you have if you have internal databases, or if a tooling vendor wants to use this information and incorporate it into their tools, they can do that easily without having to, you know, take a PDF and you know, scrape the text out of it. So this is the format of an individual licensed file. You know, as Jelaine said, we use SPDX license IDs to, you know, make it easy to cross-reference with SPDX. And then basically, it's essentially just a little bit of metadata on each of the terms that we thought were relevant for inclusion, a description of the term, any additional notes that are necessary or useful to give color to whoever is doing the compliance work, and then this list of use cases that the specific term applies to. So you can see that the first term under the Apache 2 license is provide a copy of the license, and it applies to use cases. So these abbreviations stand for unmodified binary, modified binary, unmodified source, and modified source. And so basically this is saying that, you know, if you are distributing this software, whether you're distributing unmodified binary, unmodified source, or modified source, this term applies to that use case. But if you go to the next term, which is in reference to providing notice of modifications that you made to the source code, that only applies to the use cases where you've modified the source code and you're distributing either source or binary. And so that's sort of a little handy reference, I guess, to make it possible for folks doing the work to only focuses on the terms that are actually applicable to the scenario at hand. I guess that's just the same thing. And then I'll bring up a copy. So this is the PDF version. So yes, as Jelaine said, I wrote a Python script that takes those YAML files and adds some front matter and then renders the document into various output formats. Jelaine referred to my awesome skills. I would refer to my adequate programming skills. They were enough to get this job done, but I'm not willing to sign off on awesome, but I do appreciate Jelaine's vote of confidence. So again, there's just, the document starts with an overview, a little bit of an explanation on what you're doing when you're putting together compliance information for a product, what this handbook is good for and what it's not, and then a little bit on how to use it, and of course, a copyright notice. The project is licensed, the content is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 license, because we do want tooling vendors, et cetera, to contribute back whatever modifications they're making, because as Jelaine said, the point of us committing our own resources to make this thing available is that we want to, as close as possible, solve this problem once and for all for as many folks who have this need as we can. And then of course the individual license entries. Now this is what the license entries look like, and so you can see that the use cases are turned into a sort of chart that just show you a little X when a use case applies to your to a given term, and so it's a little bit less cryptic in this form than it is in the machine readable format, and so here's the same license we were looking at in the YAML. I'll see if I can put them side by side.
And while you're doing that, I'll just add that there's in the GitHub repo, and I think it's probably reproduced at the top of any of the outputs, is there's a documentation document that gives you, we are trying to be really concise, as you can see with all this. Is sort of like, okay, here's the info you need to read before you start using this. In the contributing info, there's a little more detail on the different YAML fields. We figured we'd put that there because if you're consuming this in kind of the human readable format, it hopefully should be somewhat self-explanatory, and the amount of explanation, especially for the use cases in particular, sort of should be enough to get you by. But if you were going to add a new license in the YAML format, you might need a bit more information on that way it's coded. So,
so here's a little
happy to have feedback on all that.
Here's a little clip of the contributing file and showing a description of each of the fields for the YAML document. So one thing that this sort of reminds me that I skipped over is we've categorized the terms, the type of terms that might crop up in a license. So we've got the conditions, which are arguably the most important ones. These are the things that place a positive obligation on whoever is using the software in their product, and applies to these various use cases. Then we also decided to include termination provisions because often those are relevant, in one way or another to the person who's doing the compliance work. And then we sort of have a catch-all other for terms that are not exactly, they don't fit into the sort of use case categorized conditions category, and they're not termination provisions, but they are things that we thought were relevant to compliance, and so we reproduced those where those terms are relevant. And then we also included a category for terms related to license versions. So, for example, the term in GPL v2 that says that any later version of the license can apply if it's GPL v2 plus. And so that is, I think, a quick summary of what we've been doing and what the output looks like. We can, again, the GitHub URL is hidden. Is this. And yeah, so we would love anybody who's involved in compliance at your organization or on behalf of your clients to check it out, see if the information in here is useful to you, if the resource is useful, and if you have other licenses you'd like to see open an issue, if you see things that you think we've left out of licenses, or if you find a typo in a license, submit a pull request. We're very much in, running this as an open source project itself, and would love to have contributors from all over the place.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Aaron and Jelaine. We're a little bit tight on time for questions, but we will continue this discussion on the main mailing list. Would it be possible to send a copy of your slides with a little more detail to the mailing list itself?
Sure, no problem. Or Jelaine?
Oh, well, I mean, the only slide we provided just had the link. I think probably just some links to, there was a good write-up that Finos Foundation did, a description of it, and then the links to the various links to the GitHub repo and the downloadable PDF might be more useful than creating new slides.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, in a nutshell, we expect our Asian contingent to review this call on video and then use any slides on the mailing list to discuss it further. Of course, everyone's asleep here, apart from me, because it's 1:41 a.m. here in Japan. Alrighty. Aaron, if we can swap the screen share, we will move to our next briefing, which is going to be about automation and tooling, which dovetails nicely with the fact that you've been working on how this type of information can be automated. Perfect, thank you. I'm just about to start sharing my screen. So, hopefully.
Jane, while you're doing that?
Yep.
This is Nathan. I'd love to see Jelaine and Aaron's content as a link or posted on our Captic Conformance. I think it'd be great for step one where we're missing some content. So if the website's closer to ready, maybe I'll see if I can suggest a link for that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nathan. All right, Michael, FOSSology and SW360, an update from the side of Siemens. Just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Should I write an N in the chat?
No, you can just tell me audio
Okay,
and I'll move on.
That's also good. Okay, yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, when I opened the Uber conference, I remembered that it never worked on the telcos with FOSSology, and for some reason the plugin is blocked in our computers. Sharing slides. So if you would like to share the slides now, it would be a great help for my presentation.
Mm-hmm. The slide should be sharing on the Uber conference. They're showing us sharing now.
Oh, there is an icon in the lower right. I need to click. Thanks. So yeah, just some brief slides about where do FOSSology and SW360 stand right now. So let me start first with FOSSology, and let's go to the next slide, which is just some good introduction that we are having two tool projects here, and let's start with FOSSology, a component analysis tool, and let's go next. A brief background on one slide is that the URL in order to learn more about FOSSology is www.fossology.org. It was initially published by Hewlett-Packard in the year 2008, and since 2015 it's a Linux Foundation collaboration project. It's also a Linux application, which sounds simple but has the implication that people on Windows or Mac OS X cannot install it natively. So you need to have either a server installation or install it in a virtualized environment on your machine. And as you might have heard, FOSSology supports a number of open source software license compliance tasks, like scanning for licenses, finding copyright statements, also authorship statements or email addresses, ECC statements, where ECC stands for Export Control and Customs. It generates documentation and reporting, and more importantly, it can import and export SPDX files. So maybe there are other open source projects out there which also scan for licenses and copyrights, and maybe they also are able to scan for ECC statements. just to emphasize why FOSSology is special, and let's go for the next slide for that. When we were doing, and I think FOSSology at Siemens is like in use since 10 years or something like that. When we were working with license compliance analysis, we found out that key is efficiency when looking into a component, and efficiency can be achieved by overview. So we have extended and contributed extensions to the FOSSology project from the beginning to provide users with this overview. On the left side, for example, with the histogram, allowing to directly jump into files with particular licensing. On the right side, showing the hierarchy inside the software component. And if you actually think about analyzing a component core, if you have done that in the past, you might have found a lot of special cases. For example, this nice Java project, which includes jars, which include jars, and you would like to unpack all these Java archives inside Java archives, and would like to see the licensing inside individual files there. All this is provided by FOSSology, and therefore it provides a good tool while maintaining overview and at the same time being able to precisely find the file where a particular license has been identified. Particularly looking at individual files, let's go for the next slide. FOSSology has also a good interface of actually finding out why the scanner thinks that a license. It shows you the original file and then adds highlighting to this, like highlighting of phrases where the system is kind of thinking this is a phrase relevant for a particular license. And it even offers the comparison with reference text from a database of license texts. And when you have already this available, what you would like to do is, as a license clearing expert, you would like to confirm the finding actually, and tell the system like whenever you find this particular licensing statement, that should be treated as a concluded license statement. The notion between scanner findings and license conclusions can be also found in the SPDX specification, for example, which also reflects the idea of having on one hand a finding which was just found by an algorithm, maybe regular expressions or maybe text comparison, but a large share of licensing found out there in the wild is not really easy to determine by algorithms, and therefore we have the concept of conclusions. And with FOSSology, you have actually an interface of expressing such conclusions on particular licensing, which is not as beautiful as probably this licensing here in the beginning of the file. So I would say these are the two things where FOSSology specializes in. First of all, providing really quick navigation and good overview about different licensing found in packages. And secondly, being able to review individual licensing statements. And it's important to keep in mind that for FOSSology, it's not really to go through all 11,000 files, as it's very tinily indicated here in the top of the screenshot. It's about going through 100 different licensing statements if a particular upload or package has 100 different licensing statements. But FOSSology can do also more things. Let's go maybe for the next slide. One thing that we built into FOSSology was the import of SPDX. FOSSology was able to write files according to the SPDX specification a long time ago, but we think that importing SPDX is also very interesting functionality. It's not easy to implement, because if you implement it in a tool, even a server-based system, it's really about maintaining consistency with the existing data. So you need to imagine that if you have a server where license analysis has been already run by own agent, and then you're adding other license analysis by some external source to it, you would like to maintain both, like your own analysis and what you have actually added from the SPDX file and imported to the FOSSology server. And that's actually what FOSSology supports. It can maintain your own analysis, and you can compare it with the SPDX file contents that you have imported. And I think it was really worth the effort to extend FOSSology to maintain that trick, so to say, that own analysis and added SPDX information can be seen side by side, and it enables a number of use cases. So one use case could be, for example, to check the SPDX from a supplier. If you receive an SPDX file and would like to understand, is it actually good? Did this person work accordingly to your own standards? How would you actually analyze the SPDX file contents? You would like to use this FOSSology file aggregation view and see at what points FOSSology has found something and at which points the SPDX file has actually identified licensing. You can do then corrections and then regenerate SPDX, which is obviously also an interesting functionality. And thinking about that, the security vulnerabilities coming up, you're updating your own open source software very often. And maybe you have an SPDX file or SPDX information of a version, and you would like to update that version. How would you actually generate a new SPDX version from the older version of the component? That's also what you can do with the import functionality of FOSSology. You import an SPDX document of an older version of a component, then you try to find where it applies to a newer version of a component, and then you can generate an SPDX document for the newer version with saving work, because for files which didn't change in the newer version of the component, you don't need to do the extra work. And last but not least, with SPDX import and export, you could transfer license analysis between different FOSSology instances. If some persons have their own personal FOSSology instance on the laptop, and maybe you have an organization where you have a FOSSology server and would like to continue working on your license analysis at home, if there are people who do that, then you just could download the SPDX and then import it to your own FOSSology instance and then recheck at some other occasion, maybe not at home, maybe on the train or while you're SPDX import and export. And that, I think, all the parts I have mentioned so far underline that with FOSSology you can work very precisely when you would like to understand the licensing situation of a component. A completely different topic, and let's switch to the next slide, is actually automation. And with FOSSology. So there are now three different ways how FOSSology can be integrated with other tools in order to automate license scanning and report generation. There's the REST API. It provides you an API currently, because it's also very new, like released in the beginning of this year, of basic operations you would like to perform on the FOSSology server, like uploading files, manage folders, move files, trigger scans, and download the reporting. I think the REST API can be called for almost every platform, and thus it's a very versatile tool to integrate FOSSology with other activities in your organization. Then there is an interesting project which is called FOSSDriver, which is a Python library, and it allows you basically to program your own FOSSology workflow. It can do a little bit more than what is currently provided on the REST API, and Python is a very easy to use and straightforward scripting language, also being available on a large number of platforms. I have given the URL for FOSSDriver here on the slide. If you would like to see how the REST API works, I have also provided the URL here on www.fossology.org. And there is the old command line tools, which are also in use and even more in use nowadays for just executing nomos license scanning by command line, executing copyright scanning by command line, and so on and so on. And then I didn't know that actually the Finus open source handbook was introduced before this talk, but it is actually good because I also mentioned it, as you can see on the next slide. It's about a new feature in FOSSology. It's about license obligations. So FOSSology has the functionality to manage obligations for licenses. These are, you can call them to-dos, like as Jelaine has put it, instructions how developers or project managers should actually work with what does it actually mean if I have software licensed under a particular license? It has a management UI for administrators, and it allows you to generate documentation for components according to the involved licensing and the obligations which you have defined for the licenses. And in FOSSology, I think we even went further. We didn't really say like licenses have particular obligations, but we said like particular obligations are the same obligations for different licenses, which is I think a very good data model. So basically we have one obligation which is called provide license text, and then basically you can assign it to many licenses which have actually that obligation, and then in the generation it will occur only once for the same component. There are different sources right now for obligations. There's the OSADL license checklist, where I put the screenshot here. The raw data of the OSADL license checklist is now publicly available. There is this already presented FINO's open source handbook, license compliance handbook, sorry for abbreviating it. And for example, there is this GitHub project, Choose a License. All of them have in common that they provide machine-readable data on license obligations, which you can import with FOSSology. As you can see here on the screenshot, FOSSology has an export and import interface for obligations. It works with comma-separated values, which basically means that this is a spreadsheet format. And currently, you need to convert your own data. A colleague from me, from the FOSSology community, has already, for example, tried to convert the FINOS data, like the YAML files, because we have also seen that it's nice, machine readable, into the FOSSology CSV format, which is not so super difficult. And then you can import it to FOSSology and generate then for the occurring licenses and identified licenses in a component, the reporting, just the tailored reporting for that particular component. If you have, for example, a large component, for example, the one I showed in the previous screenshot was Eclipse BIRD, Business Intelligence and Reporting Toolkit, a very large component. If you would like to keep the overview and just print the obligations for that component, it's possible. Maybe we find a way of providing a conversion of obligations for you. That's currently we need to see how the data is and to understand what licensing implications it has. And I think in the ideal case, there would be a little script and you could convert the data from the maybe 3 or other additional given sources on your own. That could be probably a feasible way for providing FOSSology. So far for FOSSology, I think that's what I wanted to introduce to FOSSology. Are there maybe questions so far about FOSSology?
Well, there's probably one. Hi, it's Jan here. Concerning the project and the maintenance, I remember it has been taken responsibility by Siemens. Is it still one of your sponsored projects?
I'm not sure the statement is right. But where do you remember this from? Why is Siemens responsible for FOSSology?
Well, I remember that, or at least Oliver Fendt reported that it has been taken under the hood of Siemens when it was actually finalized or seized by HP. And that's why I asked whether it's still the status.
Perhaps I was not that precise. So when HP decided to move out of the project, we, together with HP, we managed to put this to the Linux Foundation as a Linux Foundation hosted project.
I got this wrong, yeah, sorry.
But we from Siemens are, let's say, the maintainers of the project itself. So the project is developed in the community, but I think mainly the work is done as a project lead by Michael.
Whoa. I'm not so sure. I mean, you could have a look on GitHub and you go into the Insight section, and then you see how the situation is nowadays. Also, with every release, we list all the GitHub IDs of developers who have contributed to a particular release. I think the situation today is sufficiently heterogeneous in terms of where contributions come from to FOSSology. There are also other persons who make presentations, who give presentations about FOSSology. I think when HP was deciding not to lead the project anymore, maybe for a while I was the most visible person on FOSSology, but I think right now you see also some other persons being, for example, maintainers of FOSSology.
Okay, thanks.
I would have some slides of about SW360, but I'm not sure right now if we should start it or maybe postpone it.
You know what? The time is a little tight, so my suggestion is we continue with SW360 next month as expanded discussion around automation. Would that work for everyone?
Sure.
Okay, so the important point about FOSSology and the overview we have here is that a lot of companies are using FOSSology for automation right now, and what's happening there is probably the closest we have to a de facto industry standard for open source license scanning at this juncture. Not at the exclusion of other projects such as ScanCode, but we just have a lot of adoption and a lot of background activity around FOSSology. SW360 fits into this very tightly, so in our follow-up briefing, when we cover that, you'll see how SW360 acts as a library for information created by FOSSology and automation. But that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We've hit the 1 hour point. Big thank you to Aaron, Jelaine, and Michael for giving us some interesting briefings on both information and automation options. We'll have slides sent to the main mailing list on both topics for follow-up. This call has been recorded. The recording will be made available to everyone. And on that note, does anyone have any final comments or questions?
Thanks again to the speakers. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
All righty.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
Thank you all, and have a great day.